It's not at all an uncommon thing nowadays that we go to websites and we have the ability to be able to log in. There's lots of different reasons that a website might want to allow a person to log in. One of them being that maybe the website is set up so that it can be updated online sort of live by an administrator, in which case we need a way to be able to allow that administrator to be able to log in so that they can make those changes. Those changes have to be hidden away behind that login because we don't want just anybody to be able to come to the website and be able to make changes to it. Other websites might allow users to log in so that they can personalize or customize their own experience there on the website. Maybe the website has particular information that belongs specifically to that user. For example, you'd log into a Twitter or a Facebook because when you log in as yourself, you're showing that website who you are, so you can then send messages as yourself. You can access your own content, your own personal custom information. There's a lot of different reasons that we might want to be able to add that type of capability to a website, the ability to be able to log in to a website. When we talk about logging into a website, what we are actually talking about is technically two separate things. Those two things are authentication and authorization. Authentication is a basic process that somebody goes through in order to prove who they are. So what we typically think of purely as the logging into a website is technically authentication. When we have a user supply a username and a password, for example, the username is that user saying who they are, and the password is supposed to act as a form of proof, being that only that one particular user should know that password. So by knowing the password that goes along with that username, they are proving that that is who they actually are. Nowadays, though, lots of other types of authentication are also becoming much more common. Some websites like Google and some of Apple's different properties are now working with two-factor authentication, where we not only provide a username and a password, but then there's also some additional form of information that has to be provided, like you have to have the ability to be able to receive a text message at a particular phone number, or you have to be able to scan a fingerprint or provide some other type of biometric information. So there's lots of different ways that we can potentially authenticate ourselves nowadays, but on the web, usernames and passwords are still the most common. The second thing that goes along with us logging into a website is what is usually called authorization. Authorization is once we have authenticated ourselves, once we have let the website know who we actually are, authorization is then the website deciding, based on who we are, what are we allowed and not allowed to do. So in some of the previous examples, if we have a website set up so that an administrator can log in, then the authorization would basically say, if this person is logged in and they're an administrator, then maybe allow them to do anything, make any of the options available to them. It's a very simple, a very sort of flat authorization scheme in that particular case. Other websites, again, talking about something maybe like Twitter or Facebook, with those kinds of websites, when you log in, once you have authenticated yourself, the authorization would then probably allow a smaller set of things to be done. If you log into Facebook, for example, you would have more abilities than you would have if you hadn't logged in. You would, for example, have the ability to write posts as yourself or edit or delete previous posts that you've made. You'd have the ability to send or confirm friend requests. But by logging into Facebook as yourself, you would not automatically gain access to the entire website. You would not be able to act as another user or access another user's private information. Or at least you shouldn't be able to. You know how Facebook is. So one way or another, if authentication and authorization is something that we might have use for in our website, how could we actually go about adding it? Well, let's take a look at our color website and talk about what we might want here. What I'm thinking about for our color website would potentially be locking it down, more or less. At the moment, if we were to take our color website and we were to make it publicly available on the web, what would happen is that anybody could come to our website and they would then be able to do anything. They could create colors, destroy colors, edit colors, whatever they would like. There is nothing currently in our colors example that is off limits. And who knows, maybe for one reason or another that's what we want, but more than likely it's not. So what I would actually like to do with our colors example here is I would like to give it a fairly simple authentication and authorization scheme. Essentially, I think for the moment, what I want to allow is I want to allow a single login. Basically, I want there to be an administrator's username and password that can be used to log in. When somebody logs in with that information, I want the colors example here to give them every access. Basically, everything that we can do now, I want them to be able to do if they log in. So really what's going to change is what happens when somebody cannot or does not log in to the colors website. In that particular case, I want to restrict that user, the users who don't log in as administrators, I want to restrict them to only being able to view. So I would like for somebody who doesn't log in to still have access to my index page. I would like for somebody who doesn't log in to still have access to the show page. But I would not want them to be able to edit or destroy or to be able to create new colors. They would essentially just be in a view-only mode. If we want to be able to edit, destroy, or create new colors, somebody would have to know the administrator password in order to be able to do that. All right, so how could we actually make this happen? Well, I'm going to need to add some new stuff to my website here, some new pages. Primarily, for example, for starters, we're going to need a login page. In order to keep things a little more structured, a little bit more organized, I think what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to create a new folder. I'm going to call it Authentication here in my directory where I have all the other files for my color example. I'm then going to go ahead and use that Authentication folder as a place to create a new login page. Alright, here we are. I've created my new login page there inside my authentication folder. This login page itself, login.php, will be a lot like my index.php or my show.php page. It will essentially sort of be a controller type page. And on this particular page, I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to put into it yet, except that I know this isn't where I actually want to do my HTML. Instead, what I'm going to go ahead and do for right now in my login page is I'm just going to go ahead and require my template page. When I require the template page, what will happen is I'll have a little bit of logic that will then look for a page called login.view, I believe is how we had it. Yeah, login.view.php, and it will then nest the content of login.view.php inside the template itself. So let me go ahead and create that login view file. Alright, here's my login.view.php file, again created in my authentication folder right alongside the login.php file. I think maybe what I'll do in this file for starters is I'm just going to add an H1 to the top and I'm just going to have it say, please log in. Alright, over in my browser then, let me just see if I can access that particular page. I'm going to go to my authentication folder and I'm going to try and pull up my page called login.php, and it didn't quite work. Looks like it probably wasn't able to find my template file. Appears to be the mistake that I've made. In the code itself, I told it to look for a page called template.php. My template.php file is actually over in my colors folder. What I might want to do is move that template file over to a more sort of neutral location. I think I'll maybe move my template file over to my library directory, so that I can then access it pretty easily from my login page. I'll say go up a directory, go over to lib, and that's where you'll find the template file. I'll also then need to run through and make that same change on all of my color pages. So for example, here on index, where it was looking for the page in its own local directory, that's now going to be over in the lib directory. So I'll make that change to all my other files as well. Now, back over in the browser, if I try to refresh my login page, it looks like it is pulling up properly now. Still have one error in there. It's telling me class flash is not found. So my login page is again built on top of my template, like all the other pages of my site are, and my template is using the flash library, so I need to make sure I put in a require for that. So back over in my login.php file, let me do a require for the flash.php file that is in my library folder. If I then pull it up in the browser one more time, it looks like we are rolling. So now I've got my login page pulling up properly. To be able to get to my login page, I might want to have a hyperlink that'll help me get there in the future. So over in my main template file, the underscore template file that I was just using there a moment ago, I already have a little bit of navigation set up here where I've got a link to my new page and my home page. maybe I'll go ahead and in there also add in a new link that will go to my login page. Now I'm working out of two different folders at this point. The login page is actually in the authentication folder, so let me link to it as if it's there because this template will be used by my color pages as well as everything else. And if I want to be able to get to my new page, my index page, which is also linked to up here on this H1, I might be doing that from the login page, so let me also be specific about the fact that those are in the colors folder. So new and index will go specifically to the colors folder and my header up here that also is a hyperlink. Hopefully that will do the trick. Again, if I go back over, hit refresh. Oops, I forgot to change the link text itself. My link to my login page, I'm going to have it actually say login. There we are. So now I have a login link up here that I click on it. It takes me to the authentication page. Clicking new or home or clicking on the actual logo of the site itself up here, those links all seem to be working despite the fact that I moved my template file. So back over to my login file, everything at that point still seems okay. For the login page itself, what the login page itself is probably mostly going to need to consist of is going to be a form, a login form. So let me go ahead and start by creating a login form. I'm going to have it submit to itself. So I'll set the action to login.php. I'll set the method for logging in to post. My submit button that I have down at the bottom, I'm going to have it say login. In the form itself, I want to put in fields for username and password. No fancy form helpers or functions here. I'm just going to make this a pretty boring little plain HTML form. So let me start by putting in an input with a label, and I'll call this input username. So I've got a label for a field called username, and a text field to store that username that has that as its value. So that looks okay. Let me also then put in an input with a label. This one I'll say is for password. This particular field I'm going to set specifically as a password field since I will be collecting a user's password information with it. There we are. And let me jump back over to my browser and see how my new form looks. That's it. Looks like I need a little bit of CSS help there. My password field's not looking quite the same way that a username field is. There we are. I've updated the look of my password field so it matches a little bit better what the username field looks like. I can now fill in both of those fields and submit, and the way I have the form set up is that when I submit, it will come right back to this page itself. So when it submits to this page itself, that essentially means we're going to come back and we are going to execute the login.php file again. So the login.php file is the file that will fundamentally set up this page, this form, but it'll also now become the page that's actually going to handle the form submission. So let me put in an if statement so that I can check to see if the form has been submitted. I'm going to do an if is set, and the values I'm going to look for are going to be username in the post array, and I'm going to look for password in the post array. If those two pieces of information are set, then the form has been submitted, so this is where I can then handle actually processing that login. Now, how do I actually process this login? The plan that I had for this simple little application was that there would be one username and one password that would authorize somebody to log into the website. That, of course, is different than what you might want in other websites. In a website where we want to allow each user to log in individually, there would be lots of usernames and lots of passwords. If I was in that kind of situation where there are a lot of different people who could potentially log in, then most likely what I'm going to need here is something sort of like another CRUD system. Just like here I have the ability to create, read, update, and delete colors, if I wanted to allow many people to be able to log into the website, I would probably need there to be a way to create, read, update, and delete users or accounts or whatever it is that you want to call them. Now that create, read, update, and delete for users would not necessarily be accessible publicly, but you could think of the new users function as being something like a user registration function where somebody could come to the website and potentially register. The delete of a user would be like somebody being able to destroy their accounts. And more than likely, the index and show, the different types of read, those would be things that would be more or less locked away, so only an administrator of the site would be able to look at it, look at the details of a user's account or look at a list of all the different accounts that exist. What we have here, though, is a much simpler situation in that I only plan on having a single username and password for the administrator. So I should be able to handle that essentially with an if statement. So let me say if the username that was submitted from the form, if it's equal to whatever I want the administrator's username to be, let's say the administrator's username will be Victrola, and I want to make sure that the password's also correct, so I'll say if the password that was submitted from the post array is equal to whatever I want the administrator's password to be, I'm going to set it to Firecracker. If those two pieces of information match, then at that point we could say, well, yes, this user has logged in. What happens if that information doesn't match? Well, that would be a place where we would typically show our standard username or password is not valid. We could do that pretty easily just with a little bit of an error message here. Maybe I could just create a quick little variable. I'll call it bad login, and maybe I'll set it to false. And if the username and the password submitted don't match, I'll set bad login equal to true. Then what I could do is in the actual view of my page, I could set up a little message there to view that. So maybe an if statement where we say if we have a bad login, and let me put in the end if to go along with that. And then if we actually do have a bad login, maybe I will create a little div. Maybe I'll recycle my flash message CSS styling. So I'll create a div called flash of type alert, and inside it there maybe I'll say your username, or let's say the username and password or password is not correct. The username or password is not correct. I think that'll do the trick. Back over on the login page then, that's what we'll do if everything doesn't work. What do we do if things do work? Well, there's a lot of different possibilities. Just for the moment to help us debug, let me just put the message, let me just output a message there that just says success. That's not what I'm going to want to keep eventually, but let's go ahead and give that a try just so we can test out what we have at this point. Back over in my browser, if I refresh this page, everything looks fine and dandy. If I try to submit the page with no information, there we go. We get something that looks like a flash message. Username or password's not correct. If I put in something else that's not correct, I get the exact same message. What happens if I put in something that is correct? I'll put in Victrola's correct username and password, and there we go, our success message pops up. So what we have at this point does appear to be working correctly. What we need to work on though is having echo success in here is not the way we need to actually handle a user having just successfully logged in. So what is it right here that we actually do need to do? When a user has provided the correct username and password, they have essentially successfully authenticated themselves. We, at this point, then need some way of knowing that they have authenticated themselves. And by knowing, I mean, sure, we're going to need to, say, redirect them to some other page, but we're also going to need some way for that other page to know that this process has been a success. Imagine when the user goes to the new page, for example. How will the new page know whether the user had previously succeeded in authenticating themselves while at the login page, or knowing that they hadn't, for example? We need some way of being able to keep track across the entire site of if a user has successfully completed this process. And if you haven't guessed yet, one way that we could certainly do that would be to use sessions. The way I could set this up to work is I could call session start up at the top so that we have access to our session. And then whenever the user has successfully completed the login process, into their session array, I could maybe create a new key. I'll call it login or maybe logged in. And I could do something as simple as just setting it to true. If this was going to be a more complicated authentication and authorization system where different users could log in and they would then have different capabilities, what might be better than simply true here would be storing the, say, make-believe authorization level of that user, or potentially storing the user's ID here so that user could then be pulled up, all their information could be gathered, and from that we could figure out what they're allowed to do and what they aren't. But here in this particular example, where we're doing a very flat authorization scheme, where basically if you log in, you can do everything. If you don't log in, you can do virtually nothing. True should be sufficient for us right here. So that value of true is something we could then look at all the other pages to be able to figure out if the user is logged in or they aren't. So if the user has successfully completed their authentication, then we put a true value for logged in into their session, and then what? Well, probably what would come next is I'd want to redirect them somewhere. So maybe I'll put in a header statement. I'll redirect them, let's say, to the index page. And it would be nice, I suppose, when they get to the index page if they receive some message letting them know that their login had been successful. So how about if I use my Flash library? I'll say Flash set notice, and I will say you are now logged in. Let's give it a try and see how that works. Back over in the browser, if I refresh my login page at that point, try to log in with invalid information, it doesn't get me anywhere. If I try and use bad information, it doesn't get me anywhere. But what if I use good information? Victrola and Firecracker? I think I mistyped something there. Let me try that again. For the username, Victrola, Firecracker for the password. And there we go. Well, almost. What it tried to do here was it tried to redirect me to the index page, but I forgot that the index page was in a different folder, so I put in an incomplete URL essentially. Here, when I did the redirection, this should have been to go up a directory, over to the colors directory, and then to the index. Let's go ahead and just go to the index page by hand here. And there we are. So we're at the index page, and am I logged in? I'm actually not 100% sure if I am or not. Let's go back to the login page and give it another try. If I am already logged in, it shouldn't do any harm to log in again. There we are, back over to the index page. Why is my message not showing up at the top? Oh, here, I have an idea of what might be wrong. Something I usually do that I forgot to do this time would be to put in an exit after I've done the redirection. It's kind of strange. A lot of times we think of redirection as automatically sending us to another code, but really it's not. When we say header location and we tell it to redirect us somewhere, all we're doing is putting information into the header that will then be sent back to the browser. Without the exit, the rest of this code actually continues to run, which means it still actually comes down and renders the template, which could certainly throw things off, especially because our template has the show flash function in it, so it will actually try to show the flash message, which will then wipe it out of the session. And then after all that's done, then the browser will actually see, hey, I'm not even supposed to be on this page. It will then redirect us over to another page. So here it's important that I remember to actually do my exit after I try to redirect by writing a message to the header. With that exit in there, let's see if I get my flash message showing up after I log in now. So back in the browser, if I go to the login page, if I put in correct information, there we go. Now when it redirects me to the index page, I'm having my flash message actually show up. So it looks like at this point I am able to successfully log in. Well, what about logging back out again? That should also be something that I'm able to do. Just like I created a login page here in my authentication folder, why don't I create a log out page that I could put into that folder as well? So in my authentication folder, here I've created a new page called Log Out. The idea would be that I could set a hyperlink to take the user over to this page, and whenever they get to this page, essentially what I would want to be able to do is I would want to be able to take that logged in true that I put into the session back out of the session again. So let me throw in a couple of other things here real quick first. We're going to need to have access to our Flash library, almost certainly. So let me put a require in for that. I'm also going to need to work with the session. So let me put in session start, so the session will be available to us. And then once all that's done, coming to this page would essentially just mean in the user's session, into the key that I called logged in, I want to set false there, showing that they are not logged in. Or I suppose another option even beyond that would be to just get rid of that key altogether. I could just say unset that particular key from the session, so it simply won't even exist anymore. Once I've actually done that, let me put together a flash message for the user. So I'll say flash set message. I'm sorry, set notice was what I called that. I'll say you are now logged out, and then let's redirect them back to the index page again. So again, I'll put together a header function, location. I'm going to say go up a directory, go over to colors, which is now becoming sort of my de facto home page. Go to the index page, and then even though the script ends right after it, this time I'm going to put in the exit anyway, just so that I don't forget. It's a good habit to be in. So that could be essentially my little log out page. If I go back to my template, in my template, I would want some way for the user to be able to log out. So the same way I added a login link for the user, let me also go ahead and add a log out link as well. So in my authentication folder, a file called logout.php, what the user will see on the page, the link text is logout. In the browser, if I refresh, there's my new logout link. If I click on it, I stay here on my index page. Technically, I didn't. I actually went to the logout page, should have wiped logged in out of my session, and then redirected me back to index again with this flash message. So now I have the ability to be able to log in and log out. That's a good first step. What we need to do now, though, to actually make that count for something is we need to set up our pages so that we can only access some of them when we are actually logged in. For the moment, if I click on the new link, it takes me straight to the new page. Let's go ahead and start there and see if we can get the new page to reject us whenever it is that we're not logged in. On my new page then, if I want the ability to be able to boot a user back out anytime that they are not logged in, I could basically just check the session to see if the session says that they are logged in. I could do something along the lines of, say, if is set in the user's session, a key called logged in, and I'm also going to check that that particular key, if it exists, is equal to true. So if that key exists in the session and it has the value of true in it, then that means they are logged in. I think what I really want to do, though, is I want to say if they're not logged in. So let's say if not is set, so if it doesn't exist, or its value is not equal to true. That's basically like saying if the user isn't logged in, or at least I hope it is. Those double negatives always start getting me. Let's give it a try though. If we're not logged in, what I would want to do is I would want to set a flash message. This time I'm going to make it an alert, and I'm going to tell the user, you must be logged in to access that page, and then I'm going to redirect them. I think I'll redirect them to the login page itself. So I'll go up and over to my authentication directory to the page called login.php. And after that's done, I'll call exit here to make sure that nothing else in the new page executes. So what the essential idea is that whenever the user tries to go to the new page will start the session, it'll load its typical libraries, but then it'll check to see if the user is logged in. If they're not logged in, they get a flash message set, they get redirected immediately over to the login page, because we exit, which means nothing else on the new page is going to happen. So from the user's point of view, they are never going to see so much as a character show up from the actual new page unless they can get past this if statement, or at least that's the plan. Let's see how that works. I'm going to go ahead and click the logout link in my browser just to make sure that I am not logged in. And now if I try to go to the new page, hey, look at that. I can't get to the new page. The new page booted me straight over to the login page and says that I have to be logged in to access that page. Well, let's give that a try and see if I can. If I do go ahead and log in as Victrola again, I'm now logged in. If I now go to the new page, it looks like the new page works just fine. Can I create a new color? Yes, I can. So as long as I'm logged in, I'm able to access the new page and I'm able to create colors. But when I'm not logged in, trying to go to the new page simply results in an alert being shown to me and me being sent over to the login page itself. So that's really kind of the beginning of that idea. What I would want to do now is I would want to take that same functionality that I've put in on the new page and I would want to put it in on all of the pages that I consider to be private. I don't really want to take and copy and paste that if statement. Imagine in the future that I wanted to change what my session variable was called, for example, or my session key for logged in. I don't want to have to go to every page on my site and rewrite this if I want to make a little change, like where I redirect to, for example. So I think I'd really like to take this if statement and maybe put it into a function that I could call. So how about I create a new class? If you haven't noticed yet, I kind of like bundling things up into classes, so that would be my preference here. A standalone function could work just as well, but I'm going to do a class. So here's what I've created. I've made myself a new file called authentication.php. I've created it in my library folder. I'll need to remember to require it on all the pages that are going to use it. And I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a class. I'm going to call it the authentication class. And in the class for right now, I'm going to start off by just creating a function in here. I'm going to make it a public static function. I'm going to call it authenticate. So whenever I want to call this function, I'm going to say authentication authenticate. Kind of a long, fancy sounding function call, but that's all right. And then what I'm going to want to do is into this function, I'm going to essentially want to take that if statement that I put together on my new page. So I'm going to take that if statement from my new page, I'm going to chop it out, and I'm going to take it and drop it over into that function in my authentication library, my authentication class. So now whenever this method is called, it will do the same basic check I was doing before. It will check the session to see if the logged in key exists, or check to see if it doesn't exist, or if it's not true. It'll then set a flash message, redirect us back over to the login page, and exit. Over on the new page, the way that I could then make use of that is that I'm going to need to require my authentication class, and then in place of that if statement, what I can say is authentication : authenticate, and that ought to do the same thing that I had a minute ago with the if statement. Let's give it a try and see how it works. Here at my login page, I'm just going to confirm that I am logged out. It looks like I am. If I try to go to the new page, it kicks me over to the login page, as it should. On the login page, if I go ahead and log in, I'm now logged in, and if I go to the new page, it works. So I'm getting the exact same functionality I had a little bit ago, but now I've set it up as this reusable method inside a class. Let's move on and look at putting it into some of our other sections. Right now I am logged out. I can click log out again just to be positive. I can currently access the edit page. I don't think I should be able to do that if I'm not logged in. Let me go to my edit page. In my edit page now, I will require my authentication class, and on that page I will say authentication authenticate. Now, if I try to go to the edit page, it sends me back over to login. Very good. Same thing for my destroy page. On the destroy page, I don't want people to be able to destroy colors unless they're logged in. So I'll require my authentication library, and again, from that library, I'll call my authenticate function. Now, if I try to destroy a color when I'm not logged in, it will not let me. So now, if I'm not logged in, I can get to the index page and I can see colors. I can get to the show page and I can see a color in detail from there, but I can't destroy a color. I can't edit a color, and I can't create new colors without logging in first. If I do go ahead and log in, there we are, I'm logged in. Now, if I want to create a new color, I should be able to. There's a new color. If I want to edit that color, I can edit it, and if I choose to destroy it, it's gone. There we are. Destroy this other color I created a while back. So I think we have a working authentication system here with a little bit of authorization in it, and I've now blocked access to those different parts. There is one other little bit that I'd like to add to this though, and that is that it is a wee bit cruel, I would almost say, in showing users who are not logged in some of these different links that they are actually not allowed to click. Showing a non-logged in user the new link, showing them the destroy and the edit links, both here on the index page and over on the show page. It would really be nicer, I think, if I only showed links to a user that was applicable to them, not every link that's available to anybody on the entire website. Well, how could we potentially do that? Let's just talk, for example, right now about just the new link up here that's shown on every page. That new link is actually here in my template. This is it right here. And what if I wanted to be able to hide it? How could I do that? Well, couldn't I essentially check for the value in the session to see if somebody's logged in? And only if they are logged in would I then show them that link? So I'm thinking something along the lines of putting that inside an if statement. This would of course need to be written properly in PHP. And in here I would say if underscore session logged in. So essentially if that is set, so if is set that, and if that same value logged in the session, if it's equal to true. If all of that's true, then that means the person's logged in and we show them the new link. Otherwise, we don't. That would be more or less what I'd be shooting for. Before I actually fill that in for real, though, that of course is again going to be something I'm going to want to do in a lot of places. I might want to use it up here to only show the log out link if they are logged in. I might want to be able to use it down in the main part of the index page to get rid of my little delete and edit bubbles that I've put in. I'm probably going to want to have this capability over on the show page to get rid of the edit and destroy links that I filled in there. So instead of filling it in here as just this general sort of if statement, what I would really rather do is maybe take and encapsulate as much of that as possible into a function, into a method that I could use. And since I've already started my authentication class, that would seem to be the perfect place for it. What if over here in my authentication class, where I already have my authenticate method, what if I put in another method? I'll say public static function, and maybe I'll just call it logged in. And maybe what I want this function to do is simply return true or false. Is the user logged in or aren't they? I think what I would expect from this function is when I say logged in, I would want true to come back if they are logged in and false to come back if they're not. So what if I just said return is set in the session, the key of logged in, and in the session, which I keep leaving an S out of, in the key of logged in if it's equal to true. So this is essentially a Boolean expression like we would put into an if statement most times. So it's going to combine true and false values and result in some final true and false value. So is set here, well, that should actually be closed off right there. So the is set will check to make sure that key actually exists in the session. If that is true or false, and we then check to see if that key has a value of true in the session, that will be true and false. Those two true and falses will be combined together with and then whatever the final result is will be returned. So it would be sort of like if I said if all of this, return true, else return false. But here, I don't really even probably need the if else. I can just return whatever true or false that expression comes from. Maybe just to be super safe with it, I could put the entire thing inside parentheses to make sure the entire thing is evaluated all at once, and then it's that final result, that final value of the expression that gets returned. So I believe that should return true when I call the logged in function. False if I'm not logged in, true if I am logged in. That's pretty much exactly the same thing I was doing up here, except I had to do it sort of backwards with all that negative logic. I think what I might be able to do now is to turn it around the other way. What if I said if not self logged in? So I'll call the function down below, putting a not in front of it to reverse it. So that then becomes, this if statement then becomes me saying if I'm not logged in. If the logged in function works correctly, then that will be nice because that'll help simplify our authenticate function too. That might even be a good way for us to be able to test it here. Let me jump back over to the browser. Let me go ahead and click new. Right now it's allowing me to go to the new page. Am I logged in? I can't remember. Let me go ahead and log out and then try new. Yeah, that does seem to be working. If I again go back to home and maybe I try to edit, yeah. So it appears that my authenticate function is working and denying me access to those pages, which makes me think my logged in function is probably working as well. By kind of pulling that little bit out here into this separate function, I think I ought to then be able to use that in my template to decide if I want to show a hyperlink or not. So let me do this. Instead of this big long gnarly if statement that I was putting together here before, how about if it just becomes if authentication logged in? I'll just call my logged in function. So if that returns true, we will show the new link. And if we are not logged in, if it returns false, we simply won't. So now when we're logged in, we should see new. When we're not logged in, we should see nothing. Let me jump back to the browser. In the browser now, if I go back to my home page, oops, looks like I misspelled my authentication class's name. Hopefully that's got it. Let's try it again. Still not showing up. Oh, you know why? I probably never actually required that class when I set up my index page. If I go over to my index page, yep, sure enough, never actually required it. Let me put in another require for my authentication file that I created. Now my index page, there we are. And the new page, the new link I should say, is not showing up anymore. The new hyperlink has disappeared. Just what I was looking for. Let me also then on my template make a change so that we see only the appropriate logged in or logged out link, not both. So I would want to see logged in if I'm not logged in and log out if I am logged in, if that makes any sense. Let's try this. Let's say if I'm logged in, then I want to see the log out link. Otherwise, I want to see the login link. So if I'm logged in, show log out. If I'm not logged in, show log in. If I jump back to the browser now, there we go. I'm currently not logged in, so I'm not seeing the new link and I'm not seeing the log out link. If I click log in, That needs to send me over to the login page, and the login page looks like it needs a require for my authentication library. So on my login page, along with my require for Flash, let me also add a require for authentication. Now my login page shows up okay. If I give it invalid data, everything does what it should. If I log in correctly, it takes me to the index page, says I'm logged in, the new link is back, and instead of the log in link, I'm now seeing the log out link. So that looks like it's working well. Let me go ahead and log out again. How about the links that show up here on the actual colors themselves for deleting and editing? Those actually come here from my index.view.php file. It is these two lines where I'm creating my edit and destroy links. Those are the two that I don't want to show up if I am not logged in. So let me put in an if statement. If I'm logged in, then show these two links. Otherwise, nothing in their place. So they're only shown if I'm logged in. So where they were showing up here for me before, if I now refresh my page, now they don't show up at all. So a regular user will never really have any indication at all that those links were ever even there. Very good. If I click on one of my colors to go over to the show page itself needs to have access to my authentication library. So here on my show page, up here at the top, let me add a require for authentication. On the show page now, everything shows up just like it did before, and here what I'd like to do is hide those edit and destroy links. So in my page called show.view.php, which is the content of that page, here are those two links that I don't want to show if we're not logged in. So just like we've done several times now, I'll say if I'm logged in, show them, and that's it. If I'm not logged in, nothing will be shown in their place. They just won't be there. So right now I'm not logged in, those two links disappear, and again, to a normal user, a non-logged in user, there's never any indication that those things were ever even there. Dark mode still work okay? Yeah, looks like it. So for just a good old regular user, when they come to the website, they get here to the index page, they can see all my lovely, lovely colors. They can click on a color, they can see the details of it. Everything just seems pretty normal. Doesn't seem to be anything here that they are not allowed to do. If I get a really inquisitive user who says, hey, I wonder if I could come and monkey with this URL and go to a secret new page, they would still be booted out. Just getting rid of the hyperlink is nice because it'll remove the temptation for a lot of people, but even somebody who still tries to type in manually a URL on their own will still be shot back out of pages that they're not supposed to be accessing. For an administrator of the site who actually wants to be able to or needs to be able to work with these colors, they'll be able to come to the site, click login. If they mess up their username or password or they're not authorized, they don't know the username or password, they're given a friendly message. If they are an authorized user and they know the secrets to put in here, they'll be able to log in, and when they do, the site goes back to being essentially what we've gotten used to up to this point. We have our list of colors with our destroy and our edit links, both here on the index page and over on the show page. They have the new link where they can create new colors. So there I've created a new color. I can edit the color. There we are. I can destroy the color. Everything works just like it has always worked, and it seems to be just fine and dandy. When they're done, they can log out, and it's like they are a regular user again. So there, through the addition of, I guess, 2 pages to our site, basically a login page and a logout page, neither of which I hope were too complicated, plus a little bit of functionality here in the form of a few functions that I created as part of a class, an authentication class. What we have now is we have the ability to allow users to log in or log out of our site. We could go oh so much further with this in that instead of there being a single username and a single password that authorize a user to log in, we could instead make it possible for there to be lots of different users. On other websites, that of course would be pretty necessary, but as far as our little color example goes, this is probably about all it actually deserves at the moment. But this hopefully does give you a basic idea of how this authentication and authorization scheme can be made to work in PHP using sessions.